The police cruiser pulled up to my house at 7:15 on a Saturday morning, and I knew exactly who had called them before the officers even stepped out of their vehicle. I had been living in the Pleasant Valley Estates subdivision of Gilbert, Arizona, for exactly 3 weeks when Sharon Whitmore decided to make my life her personal mission. My golden retriever, Max, had barked exactly one time the previous evening at around 6:30 when a delivery truck backfired on our street. One single bark. I knew this because I had been standing right next to him in my garage, organizing some tools when it happened. I had actually laughed and patted his head, telling him it was okay. The bark lasted maybe 2 seconds. Now here I was, standing on my front porch in sweatpants and a faded college shirt, watching 2 Gilbert Police Department officers walk up my driveway. The taller one, Officer Martinez according to his name tag, gave me an apologetic smile that told me everything I needed to know about how seriously he was taking this call. "Morning, sir. Are you Ethan Jameson?" he asked. "That's me. Let me guess, someone called about my dog." The shorter officer, a woman named Officer Chen, nodded while glancing at her notepad. "We received a complaint about excessive barking and disturbing the peace. The caller stated that your dog has been barking continuously for hours, keeping the entire neighborhood awake." I actually laughed out loud at that. "Officers, my dog barked once last night, one time, for about 2 seconds when a truck backfired. I was standing right next to him when it happened." Officer Martinez looked back toward the street, then at his partner. "Is the dog inside now?" "Yeah, he's probably asleep on the couch. He's 3 years old, well-trained, and honestly one of the laziest dogs I have ever owned. Want to come in and meet him?" They followed me inside, and sure enough, Max was sprawled across my sectional sofa like he owned the place, snoring softly. He cracked one eye open when we entered, saw strangers, and managed to lift his head about 3 inches before deciding it was too much effort and flopping back down. Officer Chen actually chuckled. "That's quite the ferocious beast you have got there." "Yeah, he is terrifying," I said. "Look, I know exactly who called you. Sharon Whitmore, right? She is the HOA president, lives 4 houses down in the big colonial with the fountain in the front yard," Officer Martinez sighed. "We cannot confirm who made the complaint, but between you and me, we have been getting a lot of calls from this neighborhood lately. Same type of complaints. All from the same person?" I asked. "I cannot say that officially," he said, which was basically confirmation. "But I will tell you that we have not found any violations at any of the properties we have been called to." Officer Chen walked over and scratched Max behind the ears. He wagged his tail lazily but did not bother getting up. "Has there been any ongoing dispute with your neighbors?" "I have barely met most of them," I said honestly. "I moved in 3 weeks ago. The second day I was here, Sharon showed up at my door with a 3-ring binder full of HOA rules and regulations. She spent 45 minutes going through every single rule, including the acceptable shade ranges for exterior house paint and the precise height my grass is allowed to be. Then she informed me that my mailbox was 0.3 inches too tall and needed to be adjusted." "Was it actually too tall?" Officer Martinez asked. "I measured it myself after she left. It was exactly the height specified in the HOA documents, down to the 1/4 inch. I showed her the measurements, and she got this look on her face like I had just insulted her entire family. She has driven past my house at least twice a day ever since, always slowing down to stare." Officer Chen closed her notepad. "Well, there is clearly no violation here. Your dog is quiet, you seem like a reasonable pet owner, and we will note that in our report. But I have to be honest with you, if she keeps calling in false complaints, it becomes harassment. You might want to document everything." After the officers left, I stood in my living room feeling a mixture of anger and disbelief. I had moved to Gilbert specifically because it seemed like a quiet, family-friendly community. The house was perfect, the neighborhood looked well-maintained, and the HOA fees seemed reasonable compared to other places I had looked at. Nobody had mentioned that the HOA president was apparently unhinged. I decided to take Max for a walk to clear my head. The morning was already getting warm, typical for Arizona in late May, but still pleasant enough for some exercise. Max, suddenly full of energy now that the word walk had been mentioned, bounced around my feet while I clipped on his leash. We headed down Sycamore Drive, the main street that looped through Pleasant Valley Estates. The neighborhood really was beautiful, I had to admit. Neat lawns, well-maintained homes, mature trees providing shade. A few people were out watering their gardens or washing their cars. Most smiled and waved. One older gentleman, probably in his 70s, was trimming his hedges in front of a ranch-style house with blue shutters. "Morning," I called out. "Beautiful day." He looked up and smiled warmly. "Sure is. You are the new fellow who moved into the Morrison place, right? The two-story with the brick facade, that's me. Ethan Jameson." I walked Max over to his yard and the dog immediately sat politely, tail wagging. "Bill Patterson, pleased to meet you." He set down his hedge trimmers and came over to shake my hand. "Good-looking dog you have got there." "Thanks. His name is Max. He is friendly if you want to pet him." Bill crouched down and scratched Max's ears. "I had a golden retriever years ago. Best dog I ever owned. Smart as a whip." He stood back up, glancing around as if checking to see if anyone was listening. "Hey, was that the police at your place this morning?" I grimaced. "Yeah, someone called in a complaint about my dog barking, except he barely barked at all." Bill's expression turned knowing. "Let me guess, Sharon. That's my assumption." He shook his head slowly. "That woman has been a plague on this neighborhood for 3 years now, ever since she got elected HOA president. Before that, she was just on the board and she was annoying but manageable. Now she acts like she is the queen of Pleasant Valley Estates." "What's her problem?" "Power," Bill said simply. "She retired from some corporate job about 5 years ago, moved here with her husband, and immediately inserted herself into every neighborhood activity. Her husband is actually a nice guy, quiet, keeps to himself. But Sharon, she needs to control everything. And the worst part is she has got 2 German shepherds that bark constantly. I mean all day long from sunrise to sunset." I stared at him. "You are kidding." I wish I was. "My bedroom window faces toward her backyard, and those dogs are out there every single day, barking at birds, squirrels, passing cars, their own shadows. Multiple neighbors have complained to her directly, but she always has some excuse. Says they are guard dogs and they are just doing their job. Says we are being too sensitive. Meanwhile, she calls the cops or sends violation notices if anyone else's dog makes a peep. That's insane." Bill picked up his hedge trimmers again. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Ethan. My advice: keep your head down, follow every rule to the letter, and stay off her radar. She has made life miserable for more than a few people around here." That advice might have worked if Sharon had been willing to leave me alone. But over the next 2 weeks, it became clear that she had decided I was her new target. First came the written warning about my trash cans. According to HOA rules, garbage bins had to be stored out of sight except on trash collection days. Mine were in my garage with the door closed, but Sharon claimed she had seen them visible from the street when I was pulling in one evening. She included a grainy photograph that might have shown the edge of a trash can for the 2 seconds my garage door was opening. Then there was the notice about my front porch light. Apparently, Exterior lighting had to be warm tone and appropriately subdued. Sharon decided that my standard LED bulb was too bright and too white. She wanted me to replace it with a soft amber bulb that would barely illuminate my front steps. Next was a citation about my lawn. She claimed there were weeds visible from the street. I went out with a magnifying glass and finally found 3 tiny sprouts of what might have been clover in a corner of my yard. I pulled them and took time-stamped photos to document their removal. Each notice came with the threat of fines if the violation was not corrected within 48 hours. Each notice also referenced the specific section of the HOA bylaws I was supposedly breaking. The woman had clearly memorized the entire document. What made it all more frustrating was that I could see actual violations all over the neighborhood that she completely ignored. The house 2 doors down had paint peeling on the shutters. Another home had a broken section of fence. Someone on the next street over had a boat parked in their driveway, which was explicitly forbidden in the HOA rules. But Sharon drove right past all of those to focus on my allegedly too bright porch light. Meanwhile, I started paying attention to her house. Bill had not been exaggerating about the dogs. Sharon lived in a large colonial at the corner of Sycamore and Oak Ridge, with a professionally landscaped yard and an ornate fountain featuring some kind of cherub statue. Her backyard was fenced with white vinyl privacy fencing, but you could hear her German shepherds barking constantly. I started documenting it. Every morning at around 6, the barking would start. Not occasional barks, but sustained, aggressive barking that would go on for 10, 15, sometimes 20 minutes at a time. Then there would be a brief quiet period before it started again. This went on all day, every day. I was not the only one who noticed. I started talking to more neighbors on my walks with Max, and the same complaints came up repeatedly. Sharon's dogs were a neighborhood nuisance, but nobody wanted to confront her because she controlled the HOA. She had the power to make their lives miserable with violation notices and fines. One evening, I was checking my mail when a woman around my age pulled up in a Honda sedan and parked in front of the house across the street. She waved as she got out, balancing a bag of groceries on her hip. "Hey, you are Ethan, right? I am Jennifer, from across the street." "Nice to officially meet you," I said, walking over to help her with her groceries. "Thanks. I have been meaning to come introduce myself, but work has been crazy." She fumbled with her keys to unlock her front door. "I heard Sharon called the cops on you. Word travels fast." Jennifer rolled her eyes. Everything travels fast in this neighborhood, especially when it involves Sharon. She told 3 different people that you had a vicious, out-of-control animal. "I saw your dog once when you were walking him. He looks about as vicious as a teddy bear." "That's pretty accurate," I said. "He barked once and she acted like he was attacking people. She did the same thing to the family that lived in your house before you. They had a beagle. Sweetest little dog, but it would howl sometimes, like beagles do. Sharon made their life so miserable that they ended up moving. I think that was her goal all along." "Why would she want them to move?" Jennifer shrugged. "Who knows? Maybe she did not like them. Maybe they did not bow down and worship her authority. Sharon has run off at least 4 families in the 3 years she has been HOA president. She finds something to fixate on and just will not let it go until they leave." That night, I lay in bed listening to Sharon's dogs barking and barking and barking. It was 9:30 at night, and they had been at it for at least 20 minutes straight. I could hear them clearly even with my windows closed and the air conditioning running. I grabbed my phone and started recording. The audio picked up the barking clearly, constant and aggressive. I checked the timestamp and let it record for 10 full minutes before stopping. Then I started a log, documenting the date, time, and duration of the barking. If Sharon wanted to play games with HOA rules, I was going to play too, but I was going to make sure I had evidence. Over the next week, I documented everything. I recorded audio and video of her dogs barking at all hours. I photographed the timestamps. I noted the duration of each incident: early morning, midday, evening, night. The dogs were remarkably consistent in their noise. I also started reading the HOA bylaws in detail. Sharon had given me the binder that first day, and I went through every single page, highlighting and making notes. Sure enough, there were specific provisions about noise disturbances and pet regulations. Section 7.3 stated that pets shall not create unreasonable noise disturbances to neighboring properties. Section 7.4 specified that continuous or frequent barking, howling, or other pet noises that disturb the peaceful enjoyment of the community are prohibited. There was even a provision about quiet hours from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., during which all noise shall be minimized to avoid disturbing neighbors. Sharon's dogs violated every single one of these provisions, multiple times per day. I compiled my evidence into a detailed report, including audio recordings, videos, photographs, timestamps, and citations to the specific HOA bylaws being violated. Then, I submitted a formal complaint to the HOA board. 3 days later, I received a response. It was from Sharon herself, in her capacity as HOA president. The letter stated that my complaint had been reviewed and dismissed as frivolous. It claimed that her dogs were well-behaved guard animals performing their duties, and that any barking was reasonable and necessary for property security. The letter also included a thinly veiled threat, stating that residents who file baseless complaints may face consequences for harassment of board members. I read the letter 3 times, my anger building with each pass. She had investigated herself and found herself innocent. The hypocrisy was stunning. That same day, I received another violation notice from Sharon. This time, she claimed my garage door was left open for extended periods, creating an unsightly view from the street. The photo she included showed my garage door open at 3:15 p.m. on a Wednesday. I had been unloading groceries, and the door had been open for maybe 10 minutes. That was the moment I decided to escalate things. I drove to the Gilbert Municipal Center the next morning and asked to speak to someone about noise ordinances. A city clerk directed me to the Code Compliance Department, where I met with a compliance officer named Derek Paulson. He was probably in his 40s, with graying hair and the patient expression of someone who had dealt with plenty of neighborhood disputes. "What can I help you with?" he asked, gesturing for me to sit down in his small office. I laid out the situation, showing him my documentation of Sharon's dogs and explaining the HOA double standard. He listened carefully, occasionally making notes. "So the HOA president is enforcing rules selectively?" he asked. "That's putting it mildly. She calls the cops on me when my dog barks once, but her own dogs bark for hours every day, and she dismisses any complaints." Derek pulled up Gilbert's municipal code on his computer. HOA rules are one thing, but the city also has noise ordinances. "Let me check the specific provisions." He scrolled through several screens, then nodded. "Okay, here we go. Gilbert Municipal Code Section 12-21 prohibits unreasonable noise disturbances. It specifically mentions continuous animal noises. There are also quiet hour provisions similar to what you described in your HOA bylaws. Can you do anything about it? I can open an investigation. If you have got documentation, that helps a lot. Most complaints about barking dogs come down to he said, she said, But if you have got recordings with timestamps, that's actual evidence. I handed him a flash drive with all my audio and video files. It's all here. Times, dates, durations. I've got recordings from early morning, afternoon, evening, and night. The dogs bark constantly. Derek plugged in the drive and pulled up a few files, listening with his headphones. His eyebrows rose. Wow, that's definitely excessive. He made some more notes. All right, here is what will happen. I will review all this evidence. If it supports a violation of city code, I will schedule a site visit to observe the conditions firsthand. If I witness the violation myself, I will issue a citation. The homeowner would then have the option to correct the issue or appeal the citation. How long does this take? The initial review might take a few days. The site visit would be scheduled within a week or two after that. I will be in touch. I left the municipal center feeling like I had finally done something productive. But I also knew this was going to make things worse with Sharon before they got better. Sure enough, 2 days later I found a notice taped to my front door. This one was not even about a violation. It was a friendly reminder that the HOA annual meeting was coming up in 3 weeks and that all homeowners were strongly encouraged to attend. The way it was worded made it clear that Sharon expected everyone to show up and rubber stamp whatever she wanted. I decided I was definitely going to that meeting. The next week was relatively quiet. I got one more minor violation notice from Sharon, this time claiming that my house numbers were not properly maintained. The numbers on my house were brand new, installed by the previous owners before I moved in, and in perfect condition. I responded with photos and measurements proving they met all HOA specifications. Sharon sent back a curt acknowledgement. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, I saw a City of Gilbert vehicle pull up in front of Sharon's house. Derek Paulson got out, along with another compliance officer I did not recognize. They stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes, clearly listening. Even from my house, 4 doors down, I could hear Sharon's German shepherds barking. I watched from my living room window as Derek and his colleague made notes and took what appeared to be audio readings with some kind of meter. They walked around to different vantage points, documenting the noise from various locations. The dogs kept barking the entire time, at least 15 minutes of continuous noise. Sharon's car was not in her driveway, so she was not home to interfere with their investigation. Derek and his colleague spent about 30 minutes in total, documenting everything, before getting back in their vehicle and leaving. I did not hear anything for several days. Then, on Saturday morning, I saw Sharon marching up my driveway with a piece of paper in her hand. Her face was red and her jaw was set in a tight line. I opened the door before she could knock. "Can I help you? You filed a complaint with the city about my dogs," she said. It was not a question. "I filed a complaint about a noise violation. The city investigates complaints. Those dogs are on my private property. They are not bothering anyone. Sharon, they bark constantly, all day, every day. You can hear them from anywhere in the neighborhood. They are guard dogs. They are supposed to bark. That's their job. Not continuously for hours at a time. There are noise ordinances both in the city code and in the HOA bylaws. The same bylaws you keep using to cite me for ridiculous violations." Her eyes narrowed. "I cite you because you break the rules. My trash cans in my closed garage, my porch light, 3 tiny weeds. Meanwhile, your dogs violate actual noise provisions constantly, and you ignore it because it's you. I am the HOA president. I determine what constitutes a violation. No, the bylaws determine that. You are just supposed to enforce them fairly, but you do not. You target people you do not like and ignore violations when it is convenient. Sharon stepped closer, her voice dropping to something almost threatening. "You have no idea the mistake you just made. I can make your life very difficult here. You have been trying to do that since the day I moved in. I am done being pushed around." She held up the paper in her hand. I could see it was an official City of Gilbert notice. "I received a citation, a $500 fine because of your complaint. The city is demanding I take corrective action or face additional penalties. Then maybe you should train your dogs or keep them inside, like you expect everyone else to do." "This is not over," Sharon said, turning on her heel and storming back down my driveway. I watched her go, feeling a mix of satisfaction and apprehension. I had scored a point, but I knew Sharon was vindictive enough to retaliate. I did not have to wait long. The next morning, I found 3 HOA violation notices tucked into my door. One claimed my front yard landscaping was insufficiently maintained. Another stated that my outdoor trash bins were visible from the street, even though they were in my garage. The third cited me for unauthorized exterior modifications, because apparently the welcome mat on my front porch was the wrong color. According to Sharon's interpretation of the rules, all exterior decorations had to be in earth tones, and my mat was navy blue. I took photos of everything, documented the dates and times I received the notices, and filed them away. This was harassment, pure and simple, and I was building a case. The HOA annual meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening at 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse. I arrived at 6:45 and found the small room already half full. Bill Patterson was there, along with Jennifer from across the street. I recognized several other neighbors I had seen around but had not formally met. Sharon was at the front of the room, setting up a laptop and projector. Her husband, a quiet-looking man with thinning hair, sat in the front row looking like he would rather be anywhere else. Sharon was dressed in a business suit, as if this was a corporate board meeting instead of a neighborhood gathering. I took a seat in the third row, next to Bill. He leaned over and whispered, "This should be interesting." "Has she said anything about the city citation?" I asked quietly. "Not publicly. But I heard from Nancy, who lives next door to her, that Sharon was absolutely furious. Apparently she tried to fight the citation, but the city stood firm." More residents filtered in over the next 15 minutes. By 7 p.m., there were probably 40 people in the room, a decent turnout for a neighborhood of about 80 homes. Sharon called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a gavel on the table. An actual gavel. "Thank you all for coming to the Pleasant Valley Estates HOA annual meeting. We have several items on the agenda tonight, including financial reports, upcoming maintenance projects, and proposed rule amendments." She launched into a presentation about the HOA's finances, droning on about reserve funds and landscaping contracts. Most people looked bored. A few were checking their phones. Then Sharon clicked to a new slide titled Community Standards and Enforcement. This was apparently her chance to lecture everyone. As many of you know, maintaining our community's high standards requires vigilance from all residents. Over the past year, I have issued 137 violation notices for various infractions. While I understand these notices can be inconvenient, they are necessary to preserve property values and neighborhood aesthetics. Someone in the back raised their hand. How many of those violations were for the same few households? Sharon's expression tightened. "I do not target specific residents if that's what you are implying. I enforce the rules equally." "Really?" I said, speaking up. "Because I have received 9 violation notices in the 3 weeks I have lived here, most of them for trivial issues that do not actually violate any rules." Sharon's head snapped toward me. If you received violation notices, it is because you violated the bylaws. My trash cans in my closed garage, my porch light that meets the specifications in the bylaws, 3 tiny weeds in a corner of my yard. Meanwhile, there are actual violations all over the neighborhood that you ignore. Peeling paint, broken fences, boats in driveways. But you do not cite those, do you? Several people murmured in agreement. Jennifer spoke up. She is right. I have had paint peeling on my garage for 6 months and never got a notice. But last month, Sharon cited me because my mailbox flag was supposedly too rusty. Bill Patterson stood up. And while we are on the subject of enforcement, let's talk about the noise violations. Specifically, Sharon's dogs that bark constantly, all day long, disturbing the entire neighborhood. Sharon's face turned red. My dogs are not a disturbance. They are guard animals. They bark for hours every single day, another resident called out. My kids cannot play in the backyard without constant barking. I work from home and I cannot take phone calls because of the noise. This is ridiculous, Sharon said. If you have complaints, you should file them through the proper channels. People have filed complaints, I said. You dismissed them. You investigated yourself and decided you did not violate any rules. But the city of Gilbert disagreed. That citation you got last week, that was based on the noise complaints that you ignored. The room erupted in conversation. People were talking over each other, some agreeing, some asking questions. Sharon banged her gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. That's enough. This is not the time or place for personal attacks. We need to move on to the next agenda item. But people were not backing down. A man I did not recognize stood up. I move that we hold a vote of no confidence in the current HOA board. Sharon has abused her position, enforced rules selectively, and created a hostile environment for homeowners. It is time for new leadership. That is not a valid motion, Sharon said quickly. It is not on the agenda. Actually, Bill said, pulling out a copy of the HOA bylaws, according to Section 14.6, any homeowner can make a motion at the annual meeting, and if it is seconded, it must be put to a vote. I second the motion, Jennifer said immediately. Sharon looked panicked. This is highly irregular. We need time to prepare for something like this. The bylaws do not require preparation time for a no-confidence vote, Bill continued. They just require a simple majority of homeowners present at a properly noticed meeting. This is a properly noticed meeting and we have quorum. Sharon frantically flipped through her own copy of the bylaws, clearly looking for a way out. Her husband put his hand on her arm and whispered something, but she shook him off. Fine, she said tightly. If you want to hold a vote, we will hold a vote. But you are making a mistake. This neighborhood needs strong leadership, and I have provided that. You have provided harassment and selective enforcement, someone called out. The vote was conducted by written ballot to keep it confidential. Sharon counted the ballots herself, her face growing darker with each one she unfolded. Finally, she looked up. The motion passes. 31 in favor, 7 against, 2 abstentions. A few people actually applauded. Sharon gathered her papers with sharp, angry movements. Fine. You want to run this HOA? Good luck. You will see how much work it actually is. She stormed out of the room, her husband hurrying after her. After she left, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then Bill stood up. Well, I guess we need to elect a new board. Any volunteers? The meeting continued for another hour as the residents organized themselves. Bill was elected temporary president, with Jennifer and 2 other neighbors forming the rest of the board. Their first order of business was to review all recent violation notices and dismiss anything that was frivolous or unfair. I walked out of the clubhouse that night feeling better than I had since moving to Pleasant Valley Estates. Maybe this neighborhood would actually be pleasant now. But Sharon was not done yet. The next morning, I woke to find my mailbox had been vandalized. Someone had spray-painted obscenities all over it in bright red paint. My welcome mat was missing, and someone had thrown eggs at my garage door, leaving a dried, sticky mess. I called the Gilbert Police Department and filed a report. Officer Martinez responded, the same officer who had come to my house about the dog barking complaint. He took photos and wrote up the incident. "You have any idea who might have done this?" he asked. "I have a pretty good idea," I said, telling him about the HOA meeting the previous night. He nodded slowly. "That woman again. We have gotten more calls about her in the past 6 months than just about anyone in Gilbert, but unless you have proof she did this, there is not much we can do." "I understand. You might want to consider installing some security cameras. If this happens again and you have video evidence, that changes things." I took his advice. That afternoon, I went to a home improvement store and bought a comprehensive security camera system. 4 cameras covering my front yard, driveway, garage, and backyard. They recorded continuously to cloud storage and sent alerts to my phone whenever they detected motion. The installation took most of the weekend, but by Sunday evening, my entire property was covered. I felt better knowing that if Sharon or anyone else tried something, I would have evidence. I did not have to wait long to test the system. On Tuesday night at around 11:30, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I pulled up the camera app and watched in real time as a figure in dark clothing crept up my driveway and threw something at my front door. The camera caught everything in clear infrared night vision, including the moment when the person looked up at the house, and I got a clear view of their face. It was not Sharon. It was a teenage boy I did not recognize. He ran off down the street after throwing what appeared to be more eggs, but the next alert, 5 minutes later, was more interesting. Sharon's car pulled up to the curb at the end of my driveway. She rolled down her window and handed something to the same teenage boy who had just vandalized my property. Money, from the looks of it. The cameras caught the whole exchange. I saved the footage immediately and called the police. Officer Martinez arrived within 15 minutes, along with Officer Chen. "You have got video?" Martinez asked. I showed them the footage on my phone, then pulled it up on my laptop so they could see it on a bigger screen. They watched in silence as the video showed the boy vandalizing my property, then Sharon paying him. "That's pretty clear," Chen said. "That's conspiracy to commit vandalism at a minimum, possibly criminal mischief harassment. And since she paid a juvenile to do it, that adds another layer." "What happens now?" I asked. "We will need to identify the juvenile, which should not be hard since we have clear video of his face. Then we will bring both of them in for questioning. You will need to press charges." "I absolutely will," Martinez nodded. "I will be honest with you, Mr. Jameson. This woman has been a problem for a while. We have had multiple complaints about her harassment of neighbors, but most people do not follow through with formal complaints or they do not have evidence. You have got solid video evidence of a crime. That makes a big difference." The next 2 days were a whirlwind. The police identified the teenager as Sharon's neighbor's son, a 15-year-old named Kyle who apparently did odd jobs around the neighborhood. When questioned, he immediately admitted that Sharon had paid him $50 to vandalize my property. He also admitted she had paid him to vandalize another neighbor's property the month before, though that homeowner had not filed a police report. Sharon was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit criminal damage, criminal mischief, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Kyle faced juvenile charges but would likely get probation since he cooperated, and it was a first offense. The news spread through Pleasant Valley estates like wildfire. I heard through Bill that Sharon's husband was mortified and had moved out temporarily to stay with his brother. The new HOA board issued a statement condemning Sharon's actions and assuring residents that the neighborhood would be managed fairly going forward. Sharon's court date was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, she was released on her own recognizance, but had a restraining order placed against her, prohibiting her from contacting me or coming near my property. The neighborhood changed almost overnight. Without Sharon constantly patrolling and issuing violation notices, people relaxed. Someone organized a street barbecue. Kids started playing outside more. The atmosphere became genuinely pleasant, living up to the neighborhood's name for the first time. Bill's first act as HOA president was to send Sharon a violation notice about her dogs. The notice cited the specific noise provisions in the bylaws and gave her 30 days to correct the issue or face fines. It also referenced the City of Gilbert citation and noted that continued violations would result in additional city enforcement actions. Sharon had no choice but to comply. The barking stopped almost immediately. According to Nancy, her next-door neighbor, Sharon had hired a professional dog trainer and started keeping the dogs inside during the day. The difference was remarkable. The whole neighborhood was quieter. My life returned to something like normal. I finished unpacking and settling into my house. Max and I resumed our daily walks without incident. I met more neighbors and actually started to feel like part of a community. Sharon's court date finally arrived in mid-July. I took the morning off work to attend. The courtroom was small and about half full, mostly with people I did not recognize, probably dealing with their own cases. Sharon sat at the defendant's table with a lawyer, a severe-looking woman in a gray suit. Sharon herself looked diminished somehow, smaller and older than she had appeared during her reign as HOA president. Her husband was nowhere to be seen. The prosecutor laid out the case efficiently, presenting the video evidence and Kyle's testimony. Sharon's lawyer tried to argue that it was a misunderstanding, that Sharon had paid Kyle for yard work and had no knowledge that he had vandalized anyone's property. But the video was damning. It clearly showed the timing of the payment, immediately after the vandalism, and showed Sharon looking in the direction Kyle had just come from. The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, was not buying it. "Miss Whitmore, the evidence is quite clear. You paid a minor to commit vandalism against a neighbor's property. This was retaliation for a legitimate complaint about your own conduct. I find you guilty of conspiracy to commit criminal damage and criminal mischief." Sharon's lawyer immediately stood. "Your Honor, my client is a first-time offender with no criminal history. She is a respected member of her community. We request leniency." The judge looked at some papers in front of her. "Actually, according to the pre-sentencing report, your client has been the subject of numerous complaints from neighbors and has a documented history of harassment. While this may be her first criminal conviction, it is not her first offense. I am sentencing her to 1 year of probation, 100 hours of community service, mandatory anger management counseling, and restitution to the victim in the amount of $750 to cover the cost of repairs and security equipment. Additionally, the restraining order will remain in place for the duration of her probation." Sharon's face crumpled. She started to say something, but her lawyer put a hand on her arm and shook her head. The judge banged her gavel. "Next case." I walked out of the courthouse feeling vindicated. It was not about revenge. It was about accountability. Sharon had abused her power and harassed people for years, and she had finally faced consequences. Over the next few months, life in Pleasant Valley Estates continued to improve. Bill and the new HOA board focused on actual community improvement projects rather than nitpicking violations. They organized neighborhood events, negotiated better contracts with landscaping companies, and handled legitimate issues fairly and transparently. Sharon kept to herself. I saw her occasionally, usually getting into her car or checking her mail, but she never made eye contact and never spoke to anyone. Her dogs remained quiet. Her husband eventually moved back in, and their house took on a subdued quality, lights on but curtains drawn. In September, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Sharon and her husband had put their house on the market. By October, they had sold it and moved away. Nobody seemed to know where they went, and honestly, nobody seemed to care. The family that moved into Sharon's old house was young, with 2 kids and a friendly Labrador named Biscuit. They fit right into the neighborhood immediately. Their dog and my dog became fast friends, playing together in one of the common areas every weekend. One evening in early November, I was sitting on my front porch enjoying the cooler weather when Bill walked by with his wife, Eleanor. They stopped to chat. "Beautiful evening," Bill said. "Sure is. How are things with the HOA? Smooth sailing." "We have got a healthy reserve fund, no major disputes, and actual community participation. It is amazing what happens when you treat people with respect." Eleanor smiled. "Bill told me you were the one who finally stood up to Sharon. The whole neighborhood owes you a debt of gratitude." "That woman made life miserable for a lot of people." "I just documented what was happening and followed the proper procedures," I said. "The system worked." "Still," Bill said, "it took courage. A lot of people were afraid of her." We chatted for a while longer before they continued their walk. I sat there as the sun set, turning the Arizona sky shades of orange and pink. Max was sprawled at my feet, occasionally thumping his tail when someone walked by. I thought about the past 6 months, about how much had changed. I had moved to Pleasant Valley Estates looking for a quiet place to call home, and instead, I had found myself in the middle of a neighborhood conflict. But by standing up to bullying and holding someone accountable, I had helped create the community I had been looking for all along. The irony was not lost on me. Sharon had called the cops over my dog barking once, trying to get me in trouble. Instead, her own constant noise violations had come back to haunt her. She had gotten cited by the city, lost her position of power, and ultimately faced criminal charges for her retaliation. All because she could not handle being held to the same standards she imposed on everyone else. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Hey, are you coming to the neighborhood potluck next weekend? I am making my famous enchiladas." I texted back that I would be there. As autumn turned to winter, Pleasant Valley Estates truly lived up to its name. The neighborhood had transformed from a place of tension and pettiness into an actual community. People looked out for each other. Kids played in the streets. Dogs barked occasionally, as dogs do, and nobody called the cops. The new HOA board operated with transparency and fairness. Violation notices were rare and only issued for legitimate problems. When issues did arise, they were handled with common sense and communication rather than threats and fines. I settled into a comfortable routine. Work, home, walks with Max, neighborhood events. I made real friends among my neighbors. Bill and Eleanor became regular companions for dinner and movies. Jennifer introduced me to her book club. The young family that moved into Sharon's house invited me to their kid's birthday party. This was what I had wanted when I moved to Gilbert. Not perfection, but community. Not arbitrary rules enforced by petty tyrants, but reasonable people working together to maintain a nice place to live. One Saturday morning in December, almost 7 months after the whole situation had started, I was out front watering my plants when a moving truck pulled up at the house where the family with the beagle used to live. The same family that Sharon had driven out before I moved in. I walked over as a couple in their 30s started directing the movers. The woman saw me and smiled tentatively. "Hi there. I am Rebecca. This is my husband Marcus. We are moving in. Ethan Jameson. I live 4 doors down. Welcome to the neighborhood." "Thanks. We actually lived here about a year ago, but we ended up moving because of some issues with the HOA. "Let me guess. Sharon Whitmore." Rebecca's eyes widened. "You know about her?" "Oh, I know all about her, but you will be happy to hear she does not live here anymore. And there is a new HOA board that actually acts like reasonable human beings." Marcus looked relieved. "Seriously? Because Sharon made our lives hell. We loved this house, but we could not take it anymore. Seriously. She is gone." "Actually, there is a pretty good story behind it if you want to hear it sometime." "We definitely do," Rebecca said. Over the next hour, I helped them direct the movers and told them the whole saga. They kept shaking their heads in amazement. "I wish we had stood up to her like you did," Marcus said. "But we were young and did not know how to fight back against someone like that." "You should not have had to fight back. She should not have been abusing her position in the first place." That afternoon, Bill organized an impromptu welcome-back party for Rebecca and Marcus. Half the neighborhood showed up with food and drinks. It turned into a celebration of how far Pleasant Valley Estates had come. As the sun set and people started heading home, I found myself talking with Bill and Jennifer about everything that had happened. "You know what the craziest part is?" Jennifer said. "All of this started because Sharon called the cops over your dog barking one time." "And her dogs barked all day, every day," Bill added. The hypocrisy was staggering. "The irony is that if she had just left me alone, none of this would have happened," I said. "I would have lived here quietly, followed the rules, and never paid attention to what her dogs were doing. But she decided to target me for no reason, and it blew up in her face." "The universe has a way of balancing things out," Bill said philosophically. Maybe he was right. Sharon had spent years making people miserable, enforcing rules selectively, and abusing her power. In the end, her own actions had been her downfall. She had gotten cited for the very thing she had tried to accuse me of. She had lost her position, faced criminal charges, and been forced to leave the neighborhood she had tried to control. Meanwhile, Pleasant Valley Estates had become the community it was always meant to be. Peaceful, friendly, and actually pleasant to live in. I looked around at my neighbors, people who had become friends. I thought about my house, which now truly felt like home. I thought about Max, snoozing contentedly in my living room, having no idea that his one bark 6 months ago had set all of this in motion. Sometimes standing up to bullies is risky. Sometimes it makes things worse before they get better. But sometimes, if you document everything, follow the proper procedures, and refuse to be intimidated, justice actually prevails. Sharon had called the cops over my dog barking once. Her dogs had barked all day and got cited instead. And that had been just the beginning of her downfall. It was poetic justice in its purest form. As I walked back to my house that evening, I passed the new family's home. Their beagle was in the front yard, and as I walked by, it let out a happy howl. A proper beagle sound, loud and proud. I laughed and kept walking. Nobody was going to call the cops over that. Not anymore. Pleasant Valley Estates had finally lived up to its name, and I had played a small part in making that happen. Not because I had wanted to be a hero or make waves, but simply because I had refused to accept unreasonable treatment and had stood up for what was right. That was the real lesson in all of this. You do not have to accept bullying, whether it comes from an HOA president, a neighbor, or anyone else. You have rights. There are procedures. The system, for all its flaws, can work if you use it properly, and sometimes the person trying to abuse their power ends up hoisted on their own petard. Sometimes the person who calls the cops gets cited themselves. Sometimes karma is not just a concept, but a real force that brings accountability to those who need it most. I went inside, where Max greeted me with his usual enthusiasm, tail wagging hard enough to knock over a lamp. I scratched his ears and told him he was a good boy. You started quite the adventure, I told him. One bark and look what happened. He just wagged his tail harder, blissfully unaware of the chaos that one bark had eventually caused for Sharon Whitmore. In his world, life was simple. He had food, a comfortable couch, regular walks, and a human who loved him. What else mattered? I could learn something from that perspective, I thought. After months of dealing with HOA drama, police reports, and court dates, it was time to just enjoy the peace we had all fought for. The next morning was Sunday, and I slept in for the first time in weeks. No anxiety about finding a new violation notice on my door. No stress about documenting barking or gathering evidence. Just a quiet, peaceful morning in a neighborhood that had finally found its equilibrium. I made coffee and sat on my back patio, enjoying the cool December air. Arizona winters were beautiful, perfect weather for being outside. Max joined me, settling at my feet with a contented sigh. My phone buzzed with messages in the neighborhood group chat that Bill had set up. People were planning a holiday lights competition, discussing a New Year's Eve block party, and sharing photos of their pets. It was normal, friendly community interaction. The kind of thing that should have been happening all along. Sharon's reign had been a cautionary tale about what happens when someone gets a small amount of power and lets it go to their head. She had become so focused on control that she had lost sight of what an HOA was actually supposed to do. Maintain property values and foster community, not harass residents and enforce rules selectively. The new board understood that. They focused on the big picture, addressing actual maintenance issues and organizing community events. They treated homeowners like adults who could manage their own properties with minimal interference, and the neighborhood thrived as a result. I spent the rest of that Sunday relaxing, taking Max for a long walk, and meal prepping for the week ahead. Normal, boring, wonderfully peaceful activities. No drama, no conflict, no looking over my shoulder. That evening I saw Rebecca and Marcus out walking their beagle Copper. The dog was just as I remembered him, floppy ears and soulful eyes, occasionally howling at nothing in particular. I waved from my driveway. "How is the move going?" I called out. "Great," Rebecca said. "It already feels more like home than it did the whole time we lived here before." The energy is completely different. "That is what happens when toxic people leave," I said. Marcus nodded. "We heard Sharon actually got arrested. Is that true?" "Yeah. She hired a teenager to vandalize my property after the HOA voted her out. I had security cameras that caught the whole thing." "Wow," Rebecca said. "She really spiraled." "Power corrupts," I said. "Especially when people are not held accountable. But eventually, actions have consequences." We chatted for a few more minutes before they continued their walk. Copper let out one more howl as they rounded the corner, and I smiled. That sound used to be cause for Sharon to issue violation notices and harass the family. Now, it was just the normal sound of a neighborhood dog being himself. The holidays came and went peacefully. The neighborhood lights competition was good-natured and fun, with Bill winning with an elaborate display that must have taken days to set up. The New Year's Eve block party was a huge success, with probably 60 people gathered in the clubhouse and spilling out onto the lawn. At midnight, as everyone counted down and cheered, I found myself thinking about the past year. I had moved to Pleasant Valley Estates in May, full of hope for a fresh start. Within days, I had found myself targeted by an unreasonable HOA president. But instead of giving up and moving away like others had done, I had stood my ground. I had documented everything, followed proper procedures, and let Sharon's own actions be her undoing. It had been stressful and frustrating, but in the end, it had been worth it. Not just for me, but for the entire community. Sharon's departure had allowed Pleasant Valley Estates to become what it should have been all along. A real neighborhood where people looked out for each other instead of spying on each other for violations. January brought cooler weather and a return to normal routines. I focused on work, spent time with Max, and enjoyed getting to know my neighbors better. The HOA board held quarterly meetings that were well attended and productive, focused on actual business rather than Sharon's personal vendettas. One evening in late January, almost a full year after I had moved in, I was checking my mail when I saw an unfamiliar car pull up to my house. A man in his 50s got out, looking hesitant. "Ethan Jameson," he asked. "That is me. I am Richard Whitmore, Sharon's husband." I tensed slightly, not sure what to expect. "What can I do for you?" He held up his hands. "I am not here to cause any trouble. I just wanted to apologize for everything Sharon did, for the harassment, for the vandalism. I know it is late, and I know an apology does not fix anything, but I wanted you to know that not everyone in my family supported her behavior." I studied him for a moment. He looked tired and sincere. "Where is Sharon now?" "We moved to Prescott. Smaller town, no HOA. She is still in counseling, working through her issues. The arrest was a wake-up call for her, though she is still not fully ready to admit how far she went." He shook his head. "I spent years making excuses for her behavior, telling myself she was just trying to keep the neighborhood nice. But you were right. She abused her power and made people miserable. I should have stopped her years ago." "Why didn't you?" "Easier to go along than to fight it, I guess. Cowardice." But after the arrest, after losing the house we loved, after seeing how much better the neighborhood became without her, I could not ignore it anymore. "So I am sorry. You did not deserve any of what she put you through." I nodded slowly. "I appreciate you coming here. That took courage." "It is the least I could do." He handed me an envelope. "This is a check for the restitution she owes you, plus a little extra for your trouble. I know money does not make it right, but it is something." I opened the envelope and saw a check for $2,000. "Richard, the court ordered $750. This is way more than that." "I know. But you had to install security cameras, you took time off work for court, you dealt with stress and harassment for months. $750 does not cover that. Consider it a genuine apology." We talked for a few more minutes before he left. I stood in my driveway holding the check, feeling oddly sympathetic for Richard. He had been collateral damage in Sharon's spiral, a decent man married to someone who had let power and control consume her. I deposited the check and used most of the money to make a donation to the local animal shelter in honor of Max. It seemed appropriate. If Max had not barked that one time, if Sharon had not called the cops over it, none of the subsequent events would have happened. In a weird way, Max had been the catalyst for positive change in Pleasant Valley Estates. As winter turned to spring, life continued its peaceful rhythm. The neighborhood thrived under fair leadership. Property values actually increased, not because of strict enforcement of minor rules, but because people took pride in their homes and wanted to maintain them. I never saw Sharon again. Occasionally, I wondered if she had learned anything from the experience, if the counseling and consequences had made her reflect on her behavior. But mostly, I did not think about her at all. She had been a chapter in my life that was now closed. 1 year to the day after I had moved to Pleasant Valley Estates, Bill organized an anniversary barbecue at my house. It was supposed to be a small gathering, but it turned into a full neighborhood party with probably 50 people showing up. "We are celebrating your 1-year anniversary," Bill announced to the crowd, raising a beer. "But we are also celebrating the transformation of this neighborhood." Ethan stood up to a bully when a lot of us were too tired or too scared. Because of that, Pleasant Valley Estates became the community it was always meant to be. People cheered and raised their glasses. I felt embarrassed by the attention but also proud. Not because I had taken down Sharon, but because I had helped create positive change. "To be fair," I said, Sharon took herself down. "I just documented it and followed the rules. The same rules she claimed to care so much about." "Exactly," Jennifer said. "You held her accountable. That is what leaders should do, but she thought she was above accountability." "Well, she learned otherwise," Bill said. "And we all learned that we have more power than we think. HOA boards work for us, not the other way around." The party continued into the evening with kids running around, dogs playing together, and neighbors laughing and sharing stories. This was community. This was what Sharon had tried to control and had ultimately lost because she did not understand that you cannot force people to respect you. You have to earn it. As the sun set and people started heading home, I sat on my porch with Max, watching the neighborhood settle into evening quiet. Occasionally, a dog would bark, normal and natural. Nobody called the cops. Nobody issued violation notices. It was just the sound of a living, breathing neighborhood. My phone buzzed with a text from Bill. "Thanks for letting us invade your house today, and thanks for everything you did for this community. You are a good neighbor and a good man." I smiled and texted back my thanks. Then I sat there in the gathering darkness, Max snoring softly beside me, and felt genuinely content. Sharon had called the cops over my dog barking once. She had tried to make my life miserable. She had abused her power and harassed her neighbors. And in the end, her own behavior had been her undoing. Her dogs that barked all day had gotten her cited. Her retaliation had gotten her arrested. Her need for control had cost her everything. Meanwhile, I had found exactly what I was looking for: a home, a community, and peace. Not because I had set out to fight or cause trouble, but because I had simply refused to accept unreasonable treatment and had stood up for what was right. The stars were coming out now, bright in the desert sky. Max stirred and put his head on my lap, looking up at me with those trusting brown eyes. "Good boy," I said, scratching behind his ears. "You are such a good boy." He wagged his tail, happy and content, completely unaware that his single bark had changed everything, and that was fine. Max did not need to understand the bigger picture. He just needed to be a dog, living his best life with his person in a neighborhood where dogs were allowed to bark occasionally without the police being called. That was all any of us needed, really. To be ourselves without fear of unreasonable harassment. To live in a community where rules were enforced fairly and leaders acted with integrity. To know that if someone did abuse their power, there were ways to hold them accountable. Sharon's story could have ended differently. If she had been reasonable, if she had enforced rules fairly, if she had treated people with respect, she might still be living in Pleasant Valley Estates, still serving as HOA president. But she had chosen a different path, and that path had led to her downfall. My story could have ended differently too. I could have given up and moved away like others before me. I could have suffered in silence rather than documenting evidence and filing complaints. But I had chosen to stand my ground, and that choice had made all the difference. As I sat there under the stars with my dog, in the home I loved, in the neighborhood that had become my community, I felt grateful. Not for the conflict or the drama, but for the lesson it had taught me, that ordinary people can create change when they refuse to accept injustice. Sharon had called the cops over my dog barking once. Her dogs barked all day and got cited instead. And from that single incident, an entire community had been transformed. It was a story about HOAs and power and accountability. But more than that, it was a story about standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult, about documentation and procedure being stronger than anger and intimidation, about communities